Good morning to everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you here today and give you a little bit of information about what the National Association of Conservation Districts Special Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion has been up to. Here we go. So last summer, the NACD Board of Directors adopted a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. And a portion of the actions that came out of that was to establish a special committee or a task force rather, for DEI to specifically look at a few areas of the organization and ways that not only the national organization can help advance DEI, but also how we can assist our members in their journey as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the process that brought us to where we are right now. So we looked at the internal governance of the organization. We were specifically tasked with looking at the program's policies and procedures. And so Ebony Weber, very glad to see that that was one of your recommendations as well, and to see that we're on task with that. And then finally, looking at ways that we can actively engage members of local communities. So this task force was put together, and next slide, right? And this is the current composition of the members, advisors, and staff that serve on the what is now our special committee. And so the members represent the operational regions of the organization. We also have partner advisors from our conservation family representing NRCS, NASCA, NCDEA, as well as the RC&D councils. And of course, we have our NACD staff providing assistance. The composition of the board was put together, yes, based on region, but also based on people's experiences. And so when we looked at what is DEI, should be a simple conversation, but it's not. It's one that you have to look at kind of an organic. Where is the organization? So we looked at diversity as being who we are, and our definition as the committee, we say that it's a broad concept, and that encompasses the differences among individuals. Diversity, therefore, is all inclusive. It's inclusive of all people, their thoughts, their ideas, their backgrounds, and their experiences. Equity is how we do it. We guarantee that's the fair treatment of all, access, opportunity, and advancement. And then inclusion is what we do. It's bringing individuals and groups into the processes and activities, into that decision and policy-making process in a way that they not only feel empowered, but also valued. So we started off with a poll of our membership, looking at where are they in terms of what are their needs, what are their questions, and what are their concerns. While I won't go into the nitty-gritty of the survey results, I bring this point up just to illustrate the importance of asking the people that you represent, what are their needs? Because based on the recommendations, or the feedback rather, from that survey, is how the special committee is now guiding our work into the future. And specifically, our members were asking for guidance and training. So as we delved into reviewing the organization, we looked at our internal governance. For the national organization, that involves looking at the board of directors job description, as well as members of our executive board, our region chairs and vice chairs, also examining our bylaws. What room for opportunity is there in perhaps changing the bylaws of the organization? And then we delved into the strategic plan. And the strategic plan, which had already been in place and underway, does have some very specific actions related to DEI that the organization is undergoing now and will continue to in the future. Looking at that internal governance piece is really where, again, how it begins with this examination of the organization. So we looked at the national organization and said, okay, well, how now can we help from the ground up at the local level? And that at the heart of that is open meeting law. A lot of people view open meeting law as just the bare minimum qualifications or the responsibilities and obligations that you have to do to make sure that your local conservation district meeting is up to par. So when we're looking at these programs, policies, and procedures, we took a three-pronged approach, what we call our FACT, which is the background and the information, factors that might influence how we could influence change in that process, and then we made some recommendations. And I say this with the caveat that the task force, now special committee, we are not professionals in this space. You know, we took this and underwent this process with a lot of personal and group reflection on where are we, you know, and what is our best recommendations going forward. So let's get into a little bit of the, if we can go back a step there, Ray. Yep, thank you, to open meeting laws. So some of the facts of open meeting law is that there's a lack of outreach to underrepresented and underserved communities. For some people, there's a lack of access to a meeting. It's too far away, it's hard to get to. All meetings are required to have a public notice, but we see that as the minimum bar. So what is your local conservation district doing? Are you meeting the minimum, or are you doing anything above and beyond? So here's where we have a few recommendations on things that could be done to perhaps make the meeting more open for all. And that's something as simple as placing the announcements in a location where people who historically have not attended your meetings, where they congregate. If you're always asking the same people to come to your meetings, well, you're always going to get the same people at your meetings. What we've seen in Thank You 2020 is that we can have electronic meetings and we can be successful. Does your enabling legislation allow you to do that? Can you have remote participation in your meetings so that people are part of that process? Then finally, it's having specific training on open meeting law. As locally elected officials, we have an obligation to abide by open meeting law, but beyond an obligation, it's a responsibility, and it's a great one, to make sure that your local community is understanding and aware of the issues that are going on at the local level. And then the next is the significance of a local working group. The locally led effort it truly is the foundation of conservation programs. So how do you ensure that you're hearing the local voice? Some of the factors that may be an obstacle is the public notice announcements, the timing of them. Are you giving people proper notice? Have you given them enough notice? Do you have people in your community that speak different languages? Have the meeting announcements been translated into those different languages? And also the ability to outreach to the underrepresented and underserved communities and stakeholders. Again, if you're only asking the people who typically show up at these meetings what their thoughts and opinions are, well, that's the only information that you're going to get back. So what could you do to influence that process? And that's really keeping the local community engaged. Tell the stakeholders, how is this information going to be used? How will it help NRCS adapt programs for them, and how are they going to use their input? Plan for the next meeting at the current meeting. That way they know what is the date, what's the agenda, what's the location. If your local district puts out newsletters, be sure to include information on the next local working group meeting. You want to develop, again, materials that are in languages that are inclusive of everyone in your community. And then same on technology. Look for ways to use technology to increase participation. And then next we have the local conservation district elections. This is at its heart, it is a core function of your district. Ensuring that you have leadership to advance the conservation district, its mission and its objectives into the future means that you have to have a solid core of people who are committed to the process. So where are you going to recruit individuals for that role and responsibility? What is your enabling legislation? Or does your local district elect people who are only producers? Do you have seats for advisors to sit on the local board, perhaps even in a non-voting role, but their perspective is still invited and welcomed at a meeting? If you have limited capacity at the local level, employ the help of others. Ask your state conservation agency. And so here I'm talking to the people who may be listening to this presentation after this meeting. And for state conservation officials, help your local district, help them get the word out to ensure that those local district elections are published in a wide variety of locations. They are truly seeking a diverse board and ensuring that the opinions of all matter. Then we took a look at a couple of other topics, and one of which is generational communication, and another is outreach. But ultimately, the conversation of DEI, it's a culture change. It's having conversations that in some cases are uncomfortable, and that's okay. How are diamonds created? They're created from pressure, and being uncomfortable is an okay thing because that's where we're going to have opportunity. So emotional connection and understand how each generation interacts with not only within their own generation, but within other generations. Our local boards are an aging population. So how are we going to recruit the next group of individuals to serve as locally elected officials? That means you need to understand how to reach out to the generations that have come after you. They may communicate differently than you. Doesn't mean that it's wrong, doesn't mean that it's bad, it's different. So understanding how different generations interact is extremely helpful into bringing more people into your table, making sure that everybody has a seat at the table. And then the outreach piece. That is truly meeting people where they are. And that's both physically and emotionally. Physically going to the locations where populations who are not represented meet them where they are. That is the best. Instead of just saying, well, I posted a note on the door, this is an open meeting, they were all invited. And then you wonder why people don't show up. But it's perhaps because, we haven't asked in the right way. And then in the emotional sense is, whether it's right or wrong or comfortable or not, some people are not ready to have the conversation on DEI. And others are ready to jump feet first and say, what do I need to do to get better? And having the ability to talk to both of those groups, as well as those in the middle, is really important. And so that outreach piece is ensuring, again, that everybody has a seat at the table, and not just a seat, but a place where they are actively engaged and welcome. So, where do we go from here? It's moving past open meeting law. Again, we see that as the minimum bar to be operating effectively. But, do we do best doing the minimum, or do we do best when we're under always the constant evaluation, self-evaluation, self-reflection to do better and be better? And then the issue of underrepresented and underserved. These are individuals that face additional barriers to access services. Our group, we struggled with how do we define who is underrepresented and who is underserved? Because they're not always the same. You can be underrepresented, perhaps on your local board, perhaps there's not very many females or there's no females on your local board. But are the females in that population underserved? The same with racial minorities. Perhaps they're not getting the service that they need, but maybe they are represented on the board. So how do you tackle the underrepresented and underserved piece is the key to that active engagement for all members. So where we ended up was a series of recommendations, and I'll summarize those as under the training, resource development, and next steps. So our special committee, I keep referring to it as both. So we were a task force of the organization. We developed a set of recommendations, and one of which was to turn the task force into a special committee, which our president, Michael Crowder, did. Because we view this as not a one-time, one-step effort, but it is truly the culture change. So step one accomplished, we are a special committee and will be an ongoing committee of the organization. We also recommend that we want all members of the board of directors and our NACD staff to undergo training on DEI. We spent a lot of time on resource development and developed a toolkit. And you can view that on the NACD website, nacdnet.org. And that is a compilation of resources that are out on the internet that the task force reviewed and put into different buckets, if you will. Is this something that would help at the local level, at the state level, perhaps both? Is it helping you with elections? Is it helping you with recruitment? But it's a great resource. I'm very proud of the work that the task force put into that. And that's something that will grow into the future. We've also recommended that future MOUs for the organization, for NACD, include specific language to advance DEI initiatives. And then what we're working on right now are our next steps. And that is we're in the process of reviewing and finalizing an RFP to hire a consultant for DEI, and part of those deliverables will be to help us do an organizational audit, as well as help us frame out what an advisory committee would look like. Because again, if we're only, right now, we are inclusive of members of our organization, but we would like to expand that as well, and then what members should sit on that advisory committee. So again, this is an ongoing process for us. Our committee meets once a month to tackle these issues, as well as any other issues that come up into the future. And then Ebony Weber, I saw that you had posted your graphic on what is equality and what is equity, and this is one that our task force had come up with, and how I'm also that visual person. How do we change the paradigm that we can't just talk about equality until we talk about equity, and how do we ensure that conservation, it is for all, right? We all rely on clean water, air, nutritious, abundant, safe food supply. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table and that the conversation continues. And how we summed up our report and how I'll sum up my comments today is perhaps what the most important step is to just have the conversation. Just get that conversation started, and we'll be moving in the right direction. So with that, ends my presentation. Thank you, Ray, and I'll turn it back over to you.